everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics today. This is a Solidarity Friday episode coming at you. Today is October 13th. This is being released on October 15th. I almost want to kind of rename this episode as maybe a community spotlight episode. Today we have a past student of ours, Liam Farquhar, on the show here. And Liam, we'll get into your bio. But yeah, really excited to have you on here today. How are you doing today?
Yeah, great. And I'm very excited to speak with you. It's great to see you again as well. Got a lot out of that course, so happy to talk about that at some point too.
Yeah, we'll dig into that some more. Before we get going here, I guess just some reminders for folks. What do we have going on? We have an upcoming course with Dr. Jerry Brown that kicks off on October 26th called Psychedelics Past, Present, and Future, and that's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Pre-recorded materials. Dr. Jerry Brown has put together 6 pre-recorded sessions, and then we'll meet online for four sessions on Zoom, so we can dig into Q&A and just dive deeper into the topics. And then we also have our new round of Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists coming up, and we're going to kick that off in the new year. So that date is January 6th. It's on a Thursday. We're going to go for 9 weeks this time, and we're doing the 2 groups as normal. So that's at 2 p.m. Eastern and 7 p.m. Eastern time as well. So you have your choice there. Really wonderful class if you're just trying to navigate your way through the psychedelic space. You're just getting beginning, or maybe you've been in it for a bit, and just trying to figure out, how to maybe start to provide integration services, just kind of navigate your way around the field, and develop a little bit of psychedelic literacy so you can show up and have these conversations with your clients. Feel free to join us on Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. You can learn more about our online education offerings at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And also a reminder, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Appreciate all the support there. So thank you, everybody. We'll kick it off. Liam, welcome again, and love to just hear a little bit of a background about who you are and some of the work that you do and how you got started.
Yeah, sure. So hello, everybody who's listening or viewing this. I'm Liam. So I do therapeutic coaching work using somatic experiencing and internal family systems modalities, among others. I do men's group work, and I also am a professional legal psychedelic guide as well. So working with psilocybin truffles in Holland, where it's legal to consume psilocybin. So I take people through a whole deep process with lots of preparation before, integration afterwards, supported by meditations that I've recorded and very comprehensive written guides that I've written, about 2 years to write those. So that's the work that I do. Before that, I was a management consultant, so, not a very predictable career. Before that, I was a male nanny, or nanny. So not very, although you could probably tell a story from that, I suppose, of, like nurturing, and then I think that the management consulting helped sort of polish me up a little bit and, bring professionalism to this work, and an eye for detail and evidence as well, and critical thinking. I think those things are all important, as well as compassion and curiosity and humility and groundedness and, all of those other things that I work to cultivate daily. So, that's the work that I do.
What kind of, sparked your interest to make a career shift there and to, get more involved in the psychedelic landscape? And
a big breakdown, to put it bluntly. It was a long time coming. I joined the management consulting firm as I came off antidepressants. So I was on antidepressants from 16 up until that point. So that had been about 14 years on citalopram. And it was a ridiculous time to come off the antidepressant. It was all of that stuff that had been numb to just, it opened the floodgates. And it's not a very, that kind of work environment isn't a very trauma-informed work environment. And it just became very, very intense. And I was holding back the floodgates for several years, but then it became too much, and yeah, just completely collapsed essentially. So I was like forced to finally stop and really listen to who I was, who I wanted to be as well. You know, I'd been following psychedelics as a new therapeutic model since probably around about 2006, around the time that I read the Johns Hopkins paper on psilocybin-induced mystical experiences. I'd always been interested in the sort of art and science of healing. So yeah, I'm very grateful for that period, because yeah, my body was just like, you know, I basically didn't sleep for like 6 months. I allowed it to go that long, but then finally I collapsed at 6 months, and then yeah, quit my job, rented out my flat, and went on this like very deep process of retraining and healing as well. Like I very much knew that in order to do this work, I needed to sort out a lot of my own shit. And that was a sort of background. Like I knew it was important. I didn't realize how much there was to address, I think. So yeah, it was a very deep process, and I addressed it from various angles: therapy, men's work, breath work, meditation, yoga, and then a curriculum that I put together myself. That comes at this work through I create a 7-lens approach, I call it. So internal family systems, Grothian, the psychology of Stanislav Grof, Jungian, the psychology of Carl Jung, mindfulness, scientific, shamanic, and trauma somatic. So I pieced together lots of training centered around those. And then, yeah, of course, that includes your excellent course. And for the listeners and viewers, Carl hasn't asked me to sing its praises, but it's so easy to do that, because as you said at the beginning, you know, anyone who wants to start that journey or deepen that journey of understanding about psychedelics and how they work, and it's, you know, you and Joe, you've created such a great course that's so broad, and it was really, really useful. So it was a very like important part of my retraining. So very grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess like for those that are listening that, you know, they're really trying to maybe make a career shift, or they're trying to make some adjustments, like what was that like for you to make that? I mean, it sounds like a lot of it was really wrapped up in some of your own inner work, but I mean, you know, navigating such a new field, I mean, it's also kind of confusing, right? I think it's the one thing we get asked all the time, like how do I get involved in this? How do I navigate this? And you know, sometimes there's straightforward answers, and then other times it's like, I don't know. It's, you know, the field's still emerging, and there's lots of career opportunities on the horizon. Sometimes it feels like it's here, but maybe not fully here. So yeah, I don't know. Could you walk us through like, a little bit about your journey? Like, how did you really start to make this a little bit more concrete?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mostly followed my curiosity, and the deeper I went, the more that 7-lens approach fleshed out and became my approach. I started off humanistic and went into internal family systems more. I still take a humanistic approach quite often, but internal families, you know, we can talk about that later perhaps, but it's such a powerful model. I think having that time and space to really dedicate my life to this helped, and that's that was a real luxury, I suppose. You know, I secluded myself in the Transylvanian mountains.
That's amazing.
And that was my life. And I guess now there are more courses available. When, you know, this is a while ago, so there wasn't actually anything, and this is why there wasn't much. So I had to piece together my own curriculum. I think now there are more options available to people. Yeah. But as you said, like it's still so open. Like even the protocols, they're getting established, but you know, are they necessarily the right ones? Like even they need to remain flexible. Even all the great work that's coming out of Imperial, coming out of Johns Hopkins, kings through compass pathways, everywhere. I think we need to be humble to the fact that even though they're established, even they may have some, improvements and are a constant work in progress, and the teams working within them know that as well, of course. But yeah, it's exciting and it's changing very quickly. But yeah, that can be quite overwhelming for people entering the space. I think there's some good articles. I think hasn't Psychedelics Today produced an article on some training paths.
We have some articles up there on like navigating the field, different trainings to get involved in, and then Joe and I just recently did an episode on navigating the space as well. But it's always interesting to hear other people, like your own path there, and I think what you started off by offering some integration services, but I think you're also in a unique position where you're able to do legal work in a place like Holland, right? So there's maybe people getting involved where that's not an option, and they're like, what do I do here? I think if you're already a coach or a therapist in that realm, I think one of the easiest ways is maybe just kind of focusing on the integration piece, like just helping clients work through their experiences and providing a service like that. But and I think especially if you're doing the guiding as well, it's important for integration too. I think especially with the guiding, it's so important to have gone through your own process as well. And obviously that's it's unfolding for me. It's not like I'm complete, I'm healed, but these are very sacred spaces. These are very sensitive spaces. These are spaces with lots of potential for magnified transference and countertransference and projections. And it's really, really, really important that the guide especially is aware of their unconscious, have made their unconscious processes conscious as best as they can. This is where Jung's psychology is so relevant, because he was desperate for people to realize that we have the shadow, we have these these unconscious parts, and sometimes they're disagreeable, and they're antisocial, they're whatever, and sort of understanding that we all have that within us. We all have the capacity for great light and great darkness, and to kind of to embrace that and to acknowledge it and to work with it, so it doesn't come up as a surprise, because the unfortunate thing that seems to be happening, because it is such a wild west still to some degree, well, to a large degree at the moment, is that it's unregulated, and there are, a lot of transgressions, let's say, or like straight out abuse that's happening. We're seeing more and more of that, right? Like more accounts being reported, things coming to the surface here. Recent report for those who've been following the psychedelic world. A big report was just released. So that's important. So, then just, practicing presence and groundedness. Meditation is really important for it as well. I have to I sort of enter like a trance-like state of, because I call myself an overthinker in recovery. So, sometimes I can, I have all these ideas, and, my big part of my process is returning home to the body and being more grounded. But really like embodying that sense of calm, confident presence and groundedness in the experience can go a long way as well. And that comes with experience too, not just the meditation and going through your own personal process. Yeah, exactly. Well, some of what you're talking about is kind of also relating to a recent article that I just came across and also shared with you. This is on time.com. And the title is How COVID Opened the Door to a New Era in Psychedelic Medicine. And I thought this was just really interesting. I think I think it highlights an important part of what we've all been going through, and especially frontline workers. And so this article really highlights the toll that the pandemic has really taken on all of us in the mental health space, but specifically on frontline workers. And so in a recent survey, I think this was put out by the American Medical Association, More than 20,000 frontline medical workers, 38% experiencing anxiety or depression during the pandemic, and 49 suffered burnout. And another survey found nearly 1/4 of all healthcare workers show signs of probable PTSD. And, I think it just, when I was reading this, I was just thinking about, just burnout in general in the mental health space. And when I think just in caring professions in general, and just this idea of like self-care. And I know it's always preached within these circles, but also, maybe we're also really bad at executing on it as well. And, you're bringing up doing your own work. And I think that's really important. But something else that, this article was kind of stating is like, a lot of professionals also struggle with reaching out for help. And, how do we also kind of move towards reducing some of that stigma around that? There might be kind of like that, needing to be perfect and that professionalism. It's like, oh, like I got this, but also pulling back and having enough self-awareness to say, maybe I don't. And it's totally okay for me to ask for help because, when we're completely burnt out, trying to show up to help others and, be in very vulnerable spaces, especially doing any sort of guide work, and just any deep trauma work with clients, right? Like, there's such room for error, right? And so I think the need to have your ongoing work is super important. I don't know. Anything stood out for you in that article, or just anything kind of riffing here?
Oh God, yeah. Totally. Like self-care. It's become a kind of like people mock self-care now. It's gone like so far the other way of like self-care, like bubble bath, and like sometimes self-care is also like sorting out your finances and all that boring stuff. And sometimes self-care is a little bit misunderstood sometimes. But when it comes to this type of work, oh my God, it's so essential. And obviously anyone who does this work will say that, but oh my God, my lifelines are my men's group, my own ongoing internal family systems and somatic experiencing therapy. I have peer groups. I have several peer groups. One specifically for psychedelics, one specifically for internal family systems, and a general kind of like therapeutic coaching one. They're all so important. And as you said, like, I think sometimes people do this work, there's this like self-imposed assumption that you have to have everything figured out and could be completely healed and like, no, like, and I think anyone who tries to promote that just points to an insecurity or, it's a lifelong process, right? We don't have to be fully healed in order to do this work. That's the whole like millennia old tradition of karma yoga, right? Service learning, helping out, our own awakening and healing through helping others with their awakening and healing. It's all part of it. So having that vulnerability, that humility to say, I'm really fucking struggling right now and things are overwhelming me and I need some help. It's a very good skill to develop. And sometimes I fall short of that as well. I have a history of just like pushing through stuff. I had
me too.
Chronic insomnia for so many years that, my default is pushing through discomfort because I never knew what comfort was all the time. I was just always exhausted and I still had to get through life somehow, So I carry that with me, but I'm also very, becoming much, much more sensitive to the reality as well of really needing that space and time and just like staring at the ceiling for a bit, and being okay with it.
Yeah. I had a teacher once tell me like, when you're carrying a lot, it's really okay to let somebody else carry the load for you. Like, it's okay. And I think that's, sometimes hard to give ourselves permission to maybe let somebody else carry that, especially if we're, just constantly showing up in the role, carrying that for everybody else. It almost maybe feels hard to unload that on others. Like, can other people contain everything that I'm holding here? I know I've kind of had those thoughts too. Like, wow, I feel like my process could be so big. Like, are there people out there that could really hold that at times? There's a quote here saying, healing the healers is a win-win, and everyone can potentially benefit from better healthcare outcomes. And I think that is so important to think about. And I think about some of the systemic issues within healthcare, mental health care, and just thinking about, turnover rates and high burnout rates. If we're not taking care of ourselves, again, like, how are we showing up to take care of clients and the people that you're caring for? Overall, this article is pointing towards psychedelics as a treatment for, PTSD, especially from COVID, and just the burnout people are feeling. I don't know how many reports I keep seeing, like, in the news around, like, people just leaving their jobs recently and quitting. And, I feel like a lot of people are definitely feeling this heavy feeling. And also, like, I guess, how do you talk about that too? Maybe there's somewhat of a stigma of talking about burnout, right? Like, maybe it shows signs of weakness, and maybe from our capitalistic society, it's like, no, you got to keep moving. We got to keep being productive, instead of like pulling back and saying, well, no, there's a lot of shit going on right now. And collectively, that's all taking a toll on the psyche to some degree. And it may be subtle. You may not realize it until you're already hitting that wall and being like, whoa, like, what? I know I feel that some days. Like, I just take a step back and be like, whoa, this whole year and a half has been just fucking wild,
Yeah. And I remember when, like, the first pandemic, when it started, I remember seeing all these posts like, now's a great time to, like, write that book that you've never written, and and do all these productive things. It's like, no, like, it's really fucking confusing. Like, now's the time to crumble if you need to, and that's completely fine. This is a really, like, overwhelming experience. Especially, God, the real heroes are the parents who had to homeschool. Yeah. They're going through their own stuff. They're juggling lots. They've got jobs, pressures, this new environment, and now they're teachers. So, and like what you said there about this kind of, like, just generally this culture of, like, feeling like we need to be productive. I think very much like that is it's like this post-Protestant work ethic where if we're not doing, we're a failure somehow. It's like be a human doing, not a human being. Be a good economic, productive unit, and do. And then, of course, eventually that narrative crumbles. It seems they did those famous surveys of people on their deathbeds, and they're like, why did I work so hard at a job that I didn't like particularly much? Yeah.
Time, one of our only currencies. But yeah, I know, like, after reading this article too, just some of the stuff that came up is, really thinking about a lot of the clinical research that's happening, and just thinking about, like, I guess sometimes I feel like probably people feel that it's moving so slow, and, it's only going to be, for certain people. But yeah, just this idea of, like, also having medicines like this and having treatments that are available that could really help better the well of well people, right? Or just what is that called? Yeah, the betterment of well.
The betterment of the well, yeah.
Yeah, and how much more? If we're happier, we're going to show up in our work so much differently. If we have the energy to show up, how important that is. And I don't know. Yeah, I guess the one main thing I guess I'm really trying to emphasize here is, advocating for, people to be able to have access to these medicines for your own self-care, for your own inner work. And, there's other ways of doing it, right? We can get into the work that you're doing with, say, somatic experiencing. I mean, breathwork has been a huge part of my process, and that's been really weird to not engage in any breathwork workshops over the past year and a half. And I realized, that's been such a huge way that I've been able to do some really, really deep processing. And without that, it's like, whoa, where am I doing that? I mean, I have my own kind of breathwork and somatic practices at home, but there's something about that group container going there and doing that deeper work, so therapeutic and helped me to recharge and reset and just emotionally release a lot of stuff, get it out of my body. Not having those outlets within the past year and a half, it's like, whoa, how else am I doing this work?
I was curious about doing the holotropic training, but it's not very COVID friendly. Big group of people breathing together, so it's on pause for now. I've loved breathwork. I mean, breathwork's been a big part of my process as well, and it's very somatic for me. And it's just the breath is so powerful. You can get to some extraordinarily profound healing places with just the breath, as you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, I guess just one more comment on this article here is, just really reminding people that, we've been through a lot within the past year and a half or so. It's okay if you're feeling a little burnt out, and it's okay to reach out for help and just to admit that. I know that, again, is sometimes hard to really pull back and say, wow, this is really taking a toll. Also give yourself permission to really take care of yourself if you need to. I just want to give folks permission listening, if you are feeling that burnout around a lot of stuff, whether you're a frontline worker or just, a parent where it's just been probably nonstop, that, hey, collectively, we've been dealing with very heavy energy. It's been a lot that we've all been going through. What are some ways that you can start to take care of yourself and to process? So that might be a nice little segue, Liam, into some of the work that you're doing with IFS and somatic experiencing. Why somatics? What really kind of drew you into the somatic field?
So again, for me, returning to the body, again, I'm an overthinker in recovery. And, the West very much celebrates a particular type of intellect, don't they? The kind of mathematical, scientific intelligence, very brainy, very dissociated from the body. For me, big part of my process was returning home to the body. When you take a trauma-informed approach, I've experienced and seen in my client work, and very influenced by Peter Levine's work as well, that healing, one, trauma is universal. Maybe I can at some point talk about how I frame trauma, but overcoming it is primarily a physiological process. Trauma's in the body, and overcoming it isn't a rational process. It's not a thinking process. It's a much deeper process than that. And in fact, the more you can tune your rational mind down, I found, the more an instinctual healing process can happen. A healing process that our bodies have evolved over millions of years to instinctively know how to do. And often the thinking mind gets in the way of that. Both somatic experiencing and internal family systems, they're both trauma-informed approaches. I think they're increasingly going to become more and more popular. I mean, even now, try get on any training anytime soon. It's extraordinary. So I'm very grateful to be able to have got on the training. Maybe I can talk about trauma first, and then why I think.
Go into your definition there. I'd love to hear.
And then why I think somatic experiencing and internal family systems are particularly good approaches for it. So. For me, in many respects, trauma needs a rebrand. It seems to be quite misunderstood, even by psychotherapists. I found And like I said, I feel like the trauma-informed approach is going to become increasingly important. Trauma seems to be very zeitgeisty as well. I mean, there's all of these conferences about trauma, and it's overwhelming. It's causing trauma. Just how many conferences you need to keep up with. I joke, but there are a lot.
Well, which is a good thing, right? I mean,
it's a very good
about
thing. It's a very
30 years ago, right? We weren't as advanced in this field.
It's a very good thing. And Bessel van der Kolk's very wildly popular book, The Body Keeps the Score. I think that was back recently at the #1 New York Times bestseller list, having been there previously for a while, and then it came back recently. And, it's an academic book on trauma. That says something about the collective, I feel. So yeah, there is something quite zeitgeisty at the moment about trauma. And, when I started understanding trauma, it really helped. And it's quite different from the conventional talk therapy process. Because again, you can't actually mostly you can't reach trauma or overcome it by talking or thinking. Again, it's not a rational process. So, I studied and I provide what has worked for me. So the way I frame trauma is it's a fact of life. Peter Levine, trauma expert, says it's a fact of life, but it needn't be a life sentence. So it's universal, and you can define it as anything that overwhelms us, anything that's too much, too fast, too soon, and it's then our organism's response to that overwhelm. So a very natural, very understandable, completely normal response to that overwhelm as protection. So it could be an event, it could be a period of time where something just, it builds, and then snap. It can be personal. So what traumatizes one person might not necessarily traumatize another person. So this, it means that trauma is, of course, things like war, violence, abuse, all of those things, what some people may call big T trauma. But if we define trauma as anything that overwhelms us, it's also parents denying our reality. It's also parents living vicariously through us or not regulating their emotions. It can be neglect. It can be abandonment. It can be bad breakups. It could be divorces, death of loved ones. It's also physical. So it's whiplash, it's sports injuries, it's accidents, it's surgery. Again, anything that overwhelms our organism. For example, the body can't actually distinguish between invasive genital surgery and rape. It just experiences it as an attack and then responds to that. So, and also think about how many things are overwhelming to us when we're young. We have undeveloped nervous systems, undeveloped psyches. We have nowhere to go often. We have no resources. So we just absorb that, and it can be really overwhelming. Trauma is also generational as well. So, we can model the trauma of our parents who modeled it from their parents and so on. With the emerging science of epigenetics, it seems increasingly likely that we can inherit trauma as well. And our parents can traumatize us despite their best intentions. It's worth mentioning that as well.
Yeah.
And of course, trauma goes beyond the individual as well. It can be cultural and societal. So, just think about how overwhelming generations of racism will be. Doing a bullshit job for barely enough money to pay the rent, month in, month out, rinse and repeat can be overwhelming. It seems that our culture of intense competition and comparison, fueled by social media, is overwhelming for many people. I think neoliberal capitalism is overwhelming for a lot of people. And that's just the West. Imagine how, being in a war-torn country where you have this constant threat of death. I mean, it's just
death. Yeah.
Yeah. So So trauma is anything that overwhelms us, and then our body's response to that as protection. So there was a line that I came across recently that, who was it? It was Ezra Klein, the podcaster. And he said, and he was in fact talking to Bessel van der Kolk, and he said that the body, he framed it really nicely. So the body keeps the score. So the body holds trauma, and the mind hides the score. So the our protective parts come in to obfuscate or to make sure that we don't access the traumatic memory as protection. But yeah, for me, it's primarily, as like Peter Levine says as well, it's, overcoming, my experience has been overcoming trauma has been primarily a physiological process.
Yeah.
And why that is so Peter Levine's genius was that he reminds us that we're mammals, right? So we heal like mammals. He was observing animals in the wild, and he was thinking like, well, why on the whole don't animals exhibit traumatized behavior despite constantly being overwhelmed, and overwhelmed in ways that are beyond our comprehension, but they've evolved an instinctive healing mechanism that allows them to discharge the trauma so that they can return out and look for food and socialize and play, and often that looks like shaking and tremoring. But we as humans are socialized out of shaking and tremoring because it has associations with being out of control or cowardice or whatever it is, or we just don't understand it. And we get fearful of shaking, It's like, and what that mechanism is. So whenever we're overwhelmed, our organisms have evolved over millions of years to generate fight or flight energy, adrenaline, cortisol, stuff like that. And if we can't fight or flee, again, often we can't, especially when we're young, then the next kind of level down is freeze, and all of that energy gets stuck in the body. So, I believe most of our unwanted symptoms can be better explained by that stuck energy in the body. Yeah. So it's not a talking process. It's not a rational process. It's a discharging, whereas I guess most conventional psychotherapy is about, moving beyond not removing, but moving beyond our issues. That's still important, and, creating better stories and rewriting our life scripts and, all of that still stands. But we also need to discharge this energy, because you can talk till you're blue in the face. It's not going to help. We also need to discharge this energy. So I use myself as an example. I had years of psychotherapy, and I understood things to a point, and that was useful to a point. But it's also worth remembering that every time we remember a memory, it modifies the memory. So we're always adding a layer of abstraction every time we go back. And I think sometimes that can be the trap with conventional psychotherapy, that it's like all about uncovering the details and understanding everything. We need to my view is that we need to understand cause and effect broadly, but then we actually need to discharge this energy, because once it's discharged, it doesn't come back. A lot of my unwanted symptoms, so chronic insomnia, intimacy issues, finding relationships really overwhelming, they didn't go away with psychotherapy. I understood stuff a bit better, but I still had my unwanted symptoms. So my unwanted symptoms, and that's basically what we want, right? We want our unwanted symptoms to go. That's the most important thing. That went once I started working somatically, and for me, somatic experiencing. So it's Peter Levine. He's probably I would say the leading, at least one of them, trauma experts in the world right now. It's his life's work. So that's the kind of the body keeps the score, the body holding the trauma, discharging it through the body. healing being primarily a physiological process. But then there was obviously the psychological element as well, and that's when, for me, internal family systems comes in. So yeah, maybe I'll pause there, but I can, maybe you have some comments or questions about that. And I can go on to internal family system, because I think that's definitely worth some airtime as well, because it's again
a lot to digest.
Yeah, it's quite a different, quite a radically different approach to conventional talk therapy, and it's been so helpful for me personally, and clearly for the clients that I work with as well.
Yeah. I always think that, like, insight doesn't always lead to change, right? Like, I am so analytical, like I can tease apart so much stuff and just spend my entire day just in thought process and being like, okay, I'm going to just keep thinking about this, churning through, and come up with a million different insightful things around a situation. But yeah, that doesn't always lead to change, right? Sometimes it's more stuck in our body. We need to like discharge it in some way. And I think it was Kaelia Taylor wrote about PTSD and trauma. She's actually from the breathwork world. But I use this quote in my capstone thesis on breathwork, and I'm just paraphrasing here. I don't remember it completely off the top of my head, but trauma isn't what happened to us, but it's also what has stuck with us. And I think that's the important thing that you're also highlighting too, right? It's things can happen to us all the time. It's our response then to that situation or event, right? Sometimes, I fell down and I scraped my knee, and for some people, that might be traumatic, right? Maybe they didn't then get some sort of attention later on from, a parent or a loved one. Maybe somebody else does, right? So then it's like that little scrape on somebody's knee is then all of a sudden then associated with some sort of attachment wound, and then that becomes traumatic. And so, yeah, I think you're spot on there with it's like what's stuck with inside of us and our response and the environmental responses as well as our response to the situation. And yeah, then how do we start to work with that, right? I think that's why I've been just really drawn to a lot of somatic practices, and I've definitely have gone into my own process here on the show in the past. But yeah, you're right. The body can't really differentiate between stuff. I think a lot about my near-death experience and the surgery that I had there. And, I had my whole abdomen cut open, like of a scar from like my diaphragm down to my pelvic bone. And for the longest time, there was just this feeling of being invaded, and it would just like, it just irritated me. It irritated me, but it also like freaked me out. There was always this sense of like needing to be guarded all of a sudden, feeling like something like was all of a sudden inside of me. And, I think about that, like, there were hands inside of me. I'm sorry if that's too graphic for anybody, but, trigger warnings. But, that feeling, and, I could sit there and like, I can understand it intellectually, like that's okay. But for my body is just still responding to that at times. And I've done, tons and tons of work on it. And also, I think I want to highlight how long that takes. Like I've been working on that for over 16 years. And, there was just recently within the past, 2020, I had an experience where I was able to go deeper into that experience and touch an element of fear that I've never been able to touch. But I think that came with understanding my own somatic process and having those practices, understanding what window of tolerance, understanding what my nervous system can and can't tolerate, titration, pendulation, and all those different techniques to actually allow myself to go in there. Instead of, every time I'd go in there and feel that fear, like, it triggers something inside of me. I could never touch it. And I think that's the important part too about trauma, going slow, right? I think sometimes we're so focused on big, rapid change, but also, how do we build up resiliency and tolerance in the body? And that's a very slow process.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. Like Dick Schwartz, the founder of IFS, and Peter Levine seem to butt heads on this, because Dick Schwartz believes that nothing can overwhelm the self, and we can talk about IFS in a bit. and what self means in that context. But so he believes that there's no need for titration and pendulation and all of these sorts of things, and needing to go so slow. He believes that, in fact, that validates the fearful protector's view, like parts of us that are like fearful, and it's saying like, no, you shouldn't. Yeah, it's an interesting one. For me, like both play really nicely together, but there's a lot of overlap. But yeah, there's some,
how do you approach that then? Like holding those two worldviews.
Yeah, I mean, it can go so. I mean, for me, so in the psychedelic work that I do, especially if someone is working with, has trauma, which I think we all have. Again, as I said, it's universal. I think to say that you don't work with trauma is to say that you don't understand trauma, perhaps. So if someone just shakes for 5 hours, for me, that's like the best experience, because that's how we heal as mammals. And I think the psychedelics can create that physiological safety in order to do that. It can really drop us into our bodies. It can help us like breathe properly. I mean, a big part of my process is coaching people how to breathe, and I've got like dedicated meditations for that. We're on the whole not the best breathers. So deep abdominal breathing, helping to carry the process through, unlock the chronic constrictions and tensions. That helps. But it can be a slow process. But I think internal family systems, as prep and integration and somatic experiencing, awareness for the actual experience itself, and just like spending the whole session shaking if possible, is the most healing thing we could do for ourselves. Certainly been the most healing thing that I've done for myself. It's been quite remarkable, in fact, seeing the clients that I work with. And I want to be really clear as well. I don't guarantee healing. I don't say I'm a healer. I don't say that I will heal. I don't make any of those. I don't say it's healing at all. In fact, I make it very clear that this is a process. It requires work before, during, after. A whole number of things can happen. And in fact, I get them to sign that, I don't offer treatments, but, I made that all really clear. Having said that, it has been quite remarkable to see just how healing this approach has been for people, because, and just like energetically, like the lightness, because it's like, it's a release, it's an exorcism of this stuff. And it's a mobilizing of this energy. It's quite a spiritual thing in a way, because that energy that's getting mobilized is, you might call it life force or kundalini energy. There's a lot of overlap with these ideas. So, and you just see it, like they often like sit up a bit straighter and just look lighter and brighter. And so I think if you were going to do like a pure somatic experiencing, yes, slowly, titration, in fact, I spoke to the Peter Levine equivalent of in Europe, and I posed this to her. I was like, "Look, what do you think about Dick Schwartz's view?" And she was like, "Yeah, probably right, actually. Like, you probably can't overcome the self, because again, like the self. Again, we can talk about what that means in a sec. But
what does the self mean from that framework?
Okay, shall I go into the framework of IFS then, and what it means? And
I'm sure there's people listening that don't know too much about IFS or what you're talking about here, so it would be helpful to break that down.
Okay, so internal family systems, it's not family constellations therapy, which often gets confused with. It's not about your own family. It's about your inner family. So one of the core ideas is that there's not one Kyle. There's, we're all made up of a stadium full of parts, and each one of those parts has their own role, let's say, and personality. So they're kind of grouped into two categories. You've got the exiles, so this is the trauma-informed view. So exiles are parts that were overwhelmed, abandoned, abused, neglected, hurt, shamed, whatever it was, and they get exiled into the unconscious, where they go into the conscious because it was too overwhelming at the time. And that's the kind of the natural protective mechanism of the psyche. Then we have protector parts whose role it is to make sure that we never access the exiles. They can be proactive and reactive. They can manifest as parts that get in our way, like an inner critic, for example, like a part that, is telling us like you're worthless, you shouldn't even try. What that part's trying to do is that it's trying to keep us small and safe so we don't make ourselves vulnerable. So all of Dick Schwartz says there's no bad parts, right? So all of these parts are working really hard to serve our system in the best way that they know how. And their kind of motto is do and say whatever it takes. So they will do or say, sometimes they're quite harsh, they can be quite extreme, they can have all sorts of like addictive qualities. So they're parts. We have the wounded parts, the exiles, and then the protective parts, making sure that we don't get access to those exiles. So beyond the wounded and protective parts, a core idea of internal family systems is that the essential, like at the core of who we are, is the capital S self, our essential self. So this is a self that has this drive towards wholeness, healing, and happiness. And it's like this kind of like wise inner person. So internal family systems, it's an evidence-based model, but so they've researched it and it works. But it's also got foundations in shamanism and spirituality. Like the self could be Buddha nature or Christ consciousness or Atman. And it's infinitely. It has infinite amounts of compassion, infinite amounts of curiosity. It's boundless. It's a whole universe's worth of compassion and curiosity and all those self-like qualities. So what I love about it is that, again, it's a very different approach to conventional talk therapy, not a rational process. It's kind of like a guided meditation. In fact, the therapist or practitioner is much more like a guide than they are a therapist, where sometimes they could be, in conventional like psychotherapy or psychiatry, there can be this implied power asymmetry. There's the therapist or the psychiatrist with all the answers and is waiting to make a clever intervention on the case of the psychotherapist, or the psychiatrist, like take these pills to be well like me. That's a kind of implication. This model is much more like the Ram Dass thing of like we're all guiding each other home. So all I do is provide a process using the model where the client interacts with their own parts. The parts then tell the client what they need. But the most important relationship to establish in internal family systems is that between the client and their self. Because it's the self that's always with them, and it's the self that heals. The self does all the healing. So I simply just support that process. So I don't actually need to be too clever about it. I don't need to. All the answers, all the potential, all the wisdom is within the client. And I've just seen this time and time again in my client work. So I don't doubt that this is how the psyche operates. And it's shamanic as well, right? Like soul retrieval. It's basically like a modern soul retrieval. Soul retrieval, psyche, soul, something overwhelming happened or something painful got, discarded or fragmented. And then the soul retrieval process is about bringing that back in, reclaiming it. That's essentially what this is to a degree. It goes beyond that as well, of course, but...
That's interesting. Do they talk about that in IFS training? I mean, you're the second person I've heard describe IFS as shamanism to some degree, like modern day shamanism.
Yeah, it kind of is. Again, the shamanic lens is, I'm not a shaman, I don't say I'm a shaman, but what I'm realizing is that, I have the scientific lens as well to balance it out, but there's a lot of earned wisdom in shamanism. There's a lot of stuff that isn't as applicable as well, of course, but, like shaking, they were onto shaking as healing, way back. Community is healing, they've known that for a very long time. Nature is healing, our interdependence and interconnectedness with nature, and us being vibrational beings. Song is healing, they're onto it. They know it because it works. This is why. So parts is a very shamanic idea.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, you're the second person that mentioned that. I'm like, I do kind of like that concept. Let's see. I see that we have a few more minutes left, and there's something that kind of bubbled up, not typically related to IFS, but I saw you make a post about, I guess some comments around the Newtonian-Cartesian paradigm, and really that's kind of where we're stuck at. And so I would love to just get your thoughts about that, and then I want to follow up with a somatic question or concept that I was just posed. I'm in this kind of somatic training, and somebody threw this idea out. So I want to hear what you have to say about the Newtonian-Cartesian paradigm, and then also toss out this idea.
Sure. So, that's the Newtonian-Cartesian scientific paradigm is, as you know, the sort of scientific model that we use, that a lot of our evidence is based on. And it's this view that, René Descartes, this sort of mind-body dualism, mind, matter, mind-body as being separate. And, the Newtonian side of that is, seeing the base reality as building blocks, as that matter. So let's do those separately. So the Cartesian part of that, René Descartes is around the time of the Enlightenment. Now we see that Cartesian mind-body dualism that still underpins a lot of our therapeutic models isn't very enlightened, right? We know about the mind-body connection. We know about embodied cognition. We know that trauma is in the body, and that the brain isn't the chief executive of a person. It's more like the meeting room, and our entire organism is one big interconnected, interdependent series of systems, and is really like they're constantly sending electrochemical memos, and they need somewhere to bring that all together. And that's the brain's role, basically, to bring all of those systems messages coming together to answer the question, what should we do next? So, and the Newtonian part, we're trying to understand consciousness, for example, by looking at it as a product of the brain, and it remains a hard problem of consciousness because we're looking at it, we think, because of this, Newtonian-Cartesian view, that the brain produces, it must come from matter, where my view, and a view of a lot of people who meditate or experience psychedelics, or just, understand like Eastern wisdom traditions or quantum science increasingly, is that, the brain is much more, Groff talks about this a lot, of course, the brain is much more like a receiver of consciousness. Like a television doesn't produce the actual television show, it receives it. So in this model, we have all these very clever mathematical models that work out, the maths checks out. And a nice kind of metaphor that, do you know Bernardo Kastrup?
Name sounds familiar, but not too familiar.
All right, check him out. He's probably like one of the, I would frame him as like one of the leading consciousness researchers in the world right now. So I did a 4-week course on his view of idealism, which is a bit similar to panpsychism, the fact that everything is made out of mind, everything is made out of consciousness. And he views it really nicely, or frames it really nicely. And he says that the way that we kind of see matter is like being at a football match and looking at it through a screen, right? So we can measure the screen really efficiently. We can measure in exacting amounts what the pixel is compared to this pixel, how purple this pixel is compared to how green this pixel is, you know, and the models check out. So then we feel like, oh, well, that's reality. Whereas that's not the actual football match, right? That just points to the football match, but it's not the football match in itself. So, you know, for me, how I kind of frame it is that, like, consciousness, idealism, panpsychism, the collective unconscious, God, they all point to the same thing, that, you know, like the common ground of reality beyond the material, beyond the quantum, is this common ground of, or this unified field, you know, of consciousness or something like it, that everything, you know, that it contains all potential, is infinite. And that's the self as well. That's like the Atman Brahman or God or unified field or panpsychism, however you want to frame it, common ground. And Atman being the kind of spark of our own personal consciousness. So just as consciousness is individual, like a drop, it's collective, like the ocean as well. And it's made of the same stuff, let's say. Yeah. And, you know, like wisdom traditions have been onto this for a very long time. And what's exciting for me is to see modern relativistic quantum sciences kind of validating this with stuff like, you know, Bohm's dissipative structures and the unified field theory and all of that sort of stuff. I feel like unified field theory and consciousness theory are saying the same, you know, unified consciousness theory are pretty much saying the same thing. And what I think could be quite exciting is, you know, maybe this is the next big shift in the West's evolution. You know, we've gone through major paradigm shifts in the past. We've gone from, you know, a geocentric worldview where we thought the whole solar system revolved around the Earth to a heliocentric one based on the sciences of Kepler and Galileo. So, you know, maybe the next big shift is going from that sort of Freudian view of the individual psyche, the individual consciousness, to more like Jungian view of our, you know, our consciousness is individual, but it's also part of a shared tapestry of consciousness. And I feel like we're getting there. I don't know. I get this sort of like sense in my body almost that we're kind of waking up to this a little bit. Yeah, but obviously, like the scientific, because, you know, of its own, the scientific is full of its own dogmas and its own like scientism, and there's a lot of bravado in the scientific community, and it's quite macho and sort of, you know, it's very male dominated because of that, perhaps. It's about like, you know, refuting and defending, and, you know, there's more like, it comes more naturally to men, perhaps, in terms of like the big five character traits. So, yeah, I feel like for me, the scientific method is great. It produces amazing technology in medicine and lots. And it's not to say that we need to scrap it, but I feel like we need to evolve it. And it needs to move, for me, it needs to move beyond the falsifiability test as well, because just because we can't make something falsifiable doesn't mean it's not true. We're reaching the limits of what we can measure. Yeah. You know, and we may never know. We won't be able to prove multiverse theory if that's true, but it's not to say that it might not be true. And similarly, like consciousness, like how are we going to prove that really?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I waffled, but...
No, thanks for that. Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of something that our teacher Lenny is paraphrasing here about Whitehead. But yeah, typical science is, you know, to understand the fundamental nature of reality is to look at atoms. But I think Whitehead kind of psychologizes it a little bit and says, you know, if you want to understand the fundamental nature of reality, start with psyche, start with experience. And that's so different. And so in this somatic training, somebody tossed just the question out of what is soma, and of course, when we define that word, it comes from the Greek word body, and we say somatic therapy is more a body-oriented approach to therapy, right? Like we're focusing more on bodily responses, we're focusing on body movements instead of just really trying to intellectualize. So we're talking about really the nervous system and being in there. And the person kind of threw this out there that even just saying that this is somatic psychology, that's more body-oriented, we're still grappling with this division between body and mind. Even just saying body and mind is still stuck in this Newtonian-Cartesian paradigm where we're still seeing it as separate. And so when we're saying, oh, like, you know, we really want to trust the inner wisdom of the body, and, you know, the mind kind of clutters it here and there, boom, we're causing division there again. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, and you know, it kind of got me thinking about it. And, you know, I think this really also comes from our lineage here with Dream Shadow and our teacher with Lenny with Whitehead. But yeah, that bifurcation of nature, splitting into two things, right? And it seems like that's what we do really good in our current paradigm, is splitting the two. Besides seeing it as one, what does that even look like when we start talking about somatic psychology, where there isn't this separation, right? And we don't even have the language around separation of mind and body. It is just all one to some degree. And I think that probably will be the hard part moving forward, is creating a new language for this paradigm. How do we even think about that, right? And what does that even mean? So I thought it was just really interesting to hear this lecturer kind of toss that out there. And yeah, just kind of running it by Lenny as well last week or 2 weeks ago, and just seeing what he thought about it, and boom, right? And that was his comment. That is still we're stuck in this Newtonian-Cartesian paradigm where just by saying mind body, it's already splitting it.
Totally. Yeah, we love to separate. We love to measure. You know, Alan Watts kind of famously put it, didn't he? Of you know, like existence is like we've thrown a net over it, and we can, you know, we've got all these little sort of divided areas, and again, we can measure one against the other. But the net is an illusion. Like the net again doesn't point to reality. It's all one thing. Take the net away, and it's all So yeah, we need to somehow get our heads, as you know, as a Western culture, around some more like non-dual ideas of this oneness, and again, like this common ground, or the unified field, or God, however you want to frame it, whatever floats your boat in that sense. But yeah, you're right. We slip into it so much, don't we?
Well, it's part of our language, so it's really hard to kind of move past that. It's so embedded in everything that we do. So yeah, well, I see that we're at time, Liam. This has been really fun. Anything, you know, any closing thoughts? Anything that's still kind of, stewing in your brain? No, it's just, it's been a real delight. I mean, it's such I really feel it to be a real pleasure and more importantly, a privilege as well to talk about this sort of stuff. And I love what you and Joe are doing. I see you got Michelle Jennikin on the team now as well, and yeah, what you've built is amazing. I'm very impressed. So keep up the good work. Yeah, you're doing really well. And you told me that you had this sly book that you wrote a book about the Soma. What was it called? This is my capstone thesis. It's called Breath, Psyche, and Soma. Clinical introduction to trauma resolution through breath work. So really trying to figure out how we could use different breathing techniques for treating PTSD and working with people with trauma.
Is that available to buy? Like, can you buy that on Amazon? Or?
Yeah, people can find it on Amazon if you just maybe type that in or type my name in. I think it shows up in Amazon. I usually just send people over to my Lulu link. I get more of a commission from Lulu than Amazon. But if you're listening, you want to check that out. It's called Breath, Psyche, Soma, Clinical Introduction to Trauma Resolution through Breath Work. And yeah, you can just type that in Amazon and find it on there.
I thought it was hilarious that you just wrote this sort of sly book on the side. Like, this
I
man
don't know how
must wake up early.
I don't know how I completed that, because I completed that during the spring of 2019. I was traveling as much as I traveled so much that spring, and I don't know how the hell I knocked that out. I'm still surprised. I go back and go, how the hell do I find the energy to write all that? I mean, obviously it was a progression. I was working on it for a while, but yeah. Yeah, and we've talked about it on the podcast. I think if people go back in the podcast archive, you can find a breathwork podcast where I kind of break that down a little bit. But yeah, if you want to check that out, if you're a clinician and wanting to, learn how to maybe incorporate breathwork into your practice, might be a good entry point.
Yeah.
Well, Liam, anything that you want to pitch? Where can people find you? Any web presence where people can,
Oh, yeah.
check out your work?
So my company is called Brighter Pathways. So my website's brighterpathways.co. Some bugger has the .com. I've set a reminder because it comes up for renewal, I think, in March 2023, I think. Anyway. And then, my Instagram is brighter.pathways. And I try and, a kind of a pull towards this work is sharing ideas that I find interesting. It's just finding it difficult to do that around client work. But I still want to do that. So I'm trying to carve out some time for that. But yeah, if you like very, very, very occasional posts about, potentially interesting ideas, check it out if you fancy. Also fine if you don't.
Awesome. I feel I've been slacking on my Instagram game on my end outside of the Psychedelics81. So yeah, it's hard to keep up with when you're doing client work and managing a bunch of things. I get it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, well, awesome, Liam. This has been super fun. And also, thank you again for coming on. It's been really awesome just watching your evolution, meeting you, what was it, at least a year and a half ago at this point, or longer. I forget when you were in our group, but just seeing where you were at coming in and then just seeing how you're really stepping into this work. So it's been, awesome and an honor to just be part of your process. So, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for being part of the process. Yeah, very much.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll catch you on the next episode of Psychedelics Today. Take care, everybody. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're listening to this.